So Lyndall, may I ask you first,
Oh, great.
what makes you optimistic?
Experience with people that it, you know, probably in the end things work out as long as, you know, you've got good people surrounding you. That's yeah, it gives you faith.
Now, faith in people, it's very, very powerful too. So Matt Cross, what makes you optimistic?
Thinking about the future makes me optimistic. And I think deeper to that, the reason why it makes me optimistic is I've got control over the future, as opposed to what doesn't sometimes make me optimistic is learning from my mistakes. Yeah, the future makes me optimistic.
That is beautiful. Pip.
I have a strong sense of family and connections with people. And on your survey, I put down that I felt that I was naturally optimistic. And I think I was just brought up in a family that surrounded by people like that. So super exciting.
Anyone here ever read Bill George's book, True North, the Harvard academic? I interviewed Bill George on what makes, and Matt's heading up to Harvard shortly. When I asked Bill George what makes him optimistic, he said, being surrounded by positive people. What a blessing. So Pip, you've nailed it. Harold Morgan, may I ask what makes you optimistic?
Well, the opposite is being depressed, and I don't like being depressed. So
right, I agree.
That's very solid. John Steele.
It's an interesting question. I was going to say, like Harold, I'm not a pessimist, I'm an optimist. I make sure I'm not an optimist, not a pessimist, sorry. I think I like to consider I'm an optimist because I like to encourage optimism from the people that I mix with. And to me, it's a reward if I can get an optimistic point of view across and encourage their optimism, then I've given them something as well as myself.
Absolutely. Do you know, anyone ever read The Power of Positive Thinking by Norman Vincent Peale? Yeah, so Norman Vincent Peale says what you say, John. He says, never argue with people unless they're being negative, and then correct them. And of course, Norman Vincent Peale, who was he? Which president was he the pastor to? The Trump family. He often gets the blame for Donald Trump, but as I did a tweet and I said, I think the sermon that Donald Trump must have been asleep in was the one when he said, don't argue with people unless they're wrong.
Yeah.
John Waterhouse, may we ask you what makes you optimistic?
Health, good health. Yeah. I find it's impossible. You know, health is the most important thing to be optimistic. People that aren't healthy are also negative, I find.
Yeah, no, very powerful. Russell, may I ask what makes you optimistic?
All my life, whether it's sporting, whether it's professional, whether it's family, whether it's anything to do with dealing with people, I've always thought of them positively. I then, if I'm disappointed, I then go back and re-examine it again, but I still think of everything positively. It's the only way to exist.
Extraordinarily powerful, Russell. Greg Rappo, may I ask what makes you optimistic?
Yeah, hello, Victor. Thanks for your presentation. I've really enjoyed it. It's been great. Thank you. I must admit, occasionally I do feel pessimistic and I do get a little cynical and critical of some of our leaders in our world, but then I think about some of our young people and hear them speak, and so it's definitely young people makes me optimistic that, hey, that there is going to be a better future out there and hopefully they're going to take a better view of the world than some of the people are out there at present. So it's the young people. Victor, yes. Oh,
Greg, I might, in fact, I think when we do the Nelson Mandela Youth Leadership Summit next year, I'll get in touch with Lyndall and Matt, and because the Rotary Club of Carlton have volunteered to help spread the word with that. So it'd be lovely if you'd get involved. George, may I ask you what makes you optimistic?
Oh, thanks, Victor. Look, I grew up in a family which was very pessimistic. My father reckoned if you didn't go out, you didn't have an accident. So you stayed at home and everything was okay. And it just drove me insane. And one day I decided that I was going to give up all that and change my way. And I was trained as a scientist. I spent many, many years in science where you're always looking at facts. The big change for me occurred after I left the education department and got a job training people who I had nothing to do with. They were salespeople. And when they were infectious. I couldn't understand why these people drew a graph. Today, my sales are this, and tomorrow they're going to be that. And I used to say, it's madness. It's not going to be possible. But it was infectious for me, because it taught me that if you don't have that attitude, it's not going to happen. And these people drove me insane, because a fact person looked at these people drawing their graph and saying, tomorrow I'm going to have sales up to that. And it was a world that I had never had anything to do with, but it was good for me. But the expression I put in the report I sent you is, today's the tomorrow that you thought about yesterday, and all is well. And it was just such a very good thing to think about, because ever so often you worry about things and they don't happen. It's the worrying that drives you crazy. So forget about worrying and say, we're going to live for today and do the best we can. And the important thing I've learned is this: if it does happen, is there something you're going to benefit from that happening? And I think that changes your whole attitude. So, okay, if the worst comes to the worst, is there something good that's going to come out of it? And ever so often, that gives you a very positive attitude.
You are the perfect scientist, George. You put that perfectly.
Thank you.
Bobby Redmond, what makes you optimistic?
Well, thanks, Victor. Yeah, look, I mean, I was born optimistic, I think, like Pip, and I've lived all my life as an optimist, but just, it's people. People continually surprise you and bring out the best, I think. You know, people have challenges. Lots of us have challenges, and we could sort of wallow in the challenge, but, you know, we choose to carry on. I'm sorry about my budgie. He likes Zoom and he's joining in. I'm optimistic that he'll stop talking in a minute. You can hear me. But just as an example, you know, we've just been through COVID, or we're still going through COVID. But who'd have thought? We hear so many people talking about how stuck Rotarians are in their ways and they're not moving on. Who would ever have imagined a meeting like this, where we were all sitting on a screen, we're all interacting, all these Rotarians that couldn't possibly change their way of doing things have changed beautifully over the last year, and that makes me so optimistic for the future of Rotary and the future for all of us. You know, we're okay. We're going to be okay. Rotary is going to be okay. We're all going to be okay, because we'll get through COVID, we'll get through any other challenges that are thrown at us, and we'll still keep coming out on top.
Bobby, UNICEF released a report 2 days ago where they said this younger generation is probably going to be the most resilient since World War II. Because what crises have we all gone through compared to what these kids have gone through as kids? So you are wonderful. Di, you and your partner.
Oh, Barry and I both are optimists. I'll speak for me, but I, like Pip and Bobby, I was born that way and you know differently. And I had a family who always shone that light. And, you know, I was raised with faith, and so therefore that had an impact, of course, too. But everything in life, you have a choice. It isn't what happens, it's what you do about it. And so I believe in NLP, and I've done a lot of reading about that kind of thing, and the power of a negative thought is not something I choose. And so what you think matters. And so every day you get up, and I'm positive about beginning anew. And like everyone else has said, the people you are around and connect with inspire you to continue to be that way, to make a difference for yourself and for those around you.
Absolutely brilliant.
I'm Barry, and I've been thinking about this question since you posed it. And to be frank with you, I don't know what makes me optimistic. I am optimistic. If I look at my upbringing, it was neither optimistic or pessimistic. There were those parts of my life. The optimistic parts I fitted into nicely. The pessimistic parts hit a nerve, and it's always been something with me that I've never warmed to pessimism, and I always attempt to turn it into something positive. I don't know what makes me optimistic. I think it's innate, but I'm waiting to listen to hear from you if that's possible.
Of course it is. As I said, but I mean, I go back 4 generations really. You know, you know, my grandparents, you know, went through the most horrible, you know, period. My great grandfathers the same, and yet they all persisted. So for me, there's probably a bit of genetic and a bit of conditioning. So, you know, some of us it's just natural. Yeah. For others it really is, you know, a work every day. But I'll come back to that. So Trish, can I ask you what makes you optimistic?
Well, I did send in my survey to you, and I spoke about working with people. And hello, Bobby Redmond. I just saw you there. We were optimistic together at Australian Rotary Health, so for many years. But look, I put in my survey that I was optimistic running a service for people who were deaf and blind from rubella, and so. But I think it started a long way before that, and even as a child, I had my sister and we had loving parents in Melbourne, and I think that's seen, or that's cast from early on with some people, not everyone, but with me. And so I love being.
What's happened there? We've lost the link.
Oh, we'll come back to Trish. Bruce Farnsworth, what makes you optimistic?
It makes me optimistic.
Oh, sorry, Trish, we lost that. We lost a sentence.
Yeah. Oh, right. Well, I said I just love being with with happy people.
Yeah.
I love beautiful things. And to balance that with people who are deaf and blind, they taught me more about optimism, because they take so many knockbacks and disappointments, and yet they never ever become pessimistic.
Mm.
I learned true happiness through people with disabilities. So, and I think I sleep well. I wake up in the morning and I'm ready to go, do whatever in the day. And so I've got energy. And I think I'm fortunate that I do agree with you. Optimism does protect us.
And interesting, speaking of deaf and blind, Helen Keller actually wrote a book called Optimism.
Yes, yes. And I've got all her sayings everywhere, having worked in that area, and I'm still working in that area now. So it's, you know, having people on a board who are vision and hearing impaired, and even having to use an interpreter to spell out on their hand what's being said, and still be able to do board duties is just inspiring.
Well, if you ever want us to do a session with you, really, we'll be very delighted to do so for you.
Love to.
And the board, we actually recommend to boards that every 3 months they put this question on the board paper as the first question. Because a lot of Australian boards, you get that stupid question, what's keeping you awake at night?
Well, that's right. I used to say fires.
Yeah. Whereas this one forces people to, what are the opportunities, as Barry said?
Yeah.
Bruce Farnsworth, what makes you optimistic?
I don't know. I think I'm just naturally optimistic. Sometimes I wonder why.
So do we.
Thank you.
This is Cookaminas.
Well, I'm naturally optimistic too, though I do get in the dregs of depression quite quickly, quite often. But I think people and living in the moment is a really good way of approaching life. And there's always someone with a different story that you can relate to.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. Kathy, are you, you're on iPhone, are you able to unmute and join us? No, Kathy's listening in. Brico, I'll unmute you. Brico, can we ask what makes you optimistic? You have to, there we go.
Right.
Well, I think initially, I think waking up in the morning is about the most optimistic thing that happened. I'm even more optimistic now because you've told me that at the age of 85, I'm going to get another 7 years good life for being optimistic. But
being an optimist. Good on you, Brian.
to be serious for a moment, I don't know. It's the fact that, you know, over all my years, I was born during just before the Second World War, and I lived through most of my childhood in London during the Blitz and the rockets and all the rest of it. And yet we always went off to school or whatever it was the following day, and we sort of made fun of what had happened. Maybe we'd found a bit of shrapnel or something on the way to school. And so there was always a positive thing you could put on it. And my experience over the years is that this always happens. If you've had bad things happen, then there's always a, the sun shines at the end of the rainbow, or whatever the phrase is. And I think if you allow bad things to depress you and get you down, then it's a road to nowhere eventually. So you develop an attitude in which you're totally positive to things, that things will get better, and that tomorrow will be a better day than today.
I know, utterly brilliant. Well, I don't think we missed anyone. I think we got everyone, didn't we, Linda?
Yep, you got everyone.
Great.